Hello, everybody. Welcome to Faith Matters. I'm David Hennessy. For the last 2 years, I've had the pleasure of every week interviewing people who have found the key to happiness. And not just the key, but happiness itself, in the only place real happiness and peace can be found. That is, in Jesus Christ, our Lord. Most of my interviewees have gone through situations where there seemed to be no solution and no way out. But their lives tell the same story. There is always hope, and out of darkness, light will arise. Today, I have on the line from Fort Worth, Texas, a man whose name is Tim Francis. Tim has written a powerful memoir that once more shows that hope is never lost. The book is From Crack House to God's House. I'll read from the back cover. Have you ever wondered why suffering exists or how long a loving God can allow it? These are tough questions, but they will be answered. From a small town in Ohio to Ohio State University and later to Texas, Tim, the youngest of 6 children, led his mother through years of worry and heartache as he was swept up in a river of alcohol abuse and drug addiction. You will witness God's hand visibly at work, bringing Tim back from the brink of countless near-death experiences through the power of his mother's relentless prayers. Tim is a much-in-demand speaker and for the last 15 years has been crisscrossing the United States to transmit his message of hope. I encourage you to check out his website, Science Tests Faith. Hello, Tim. Well, look, it's great to have you on the phone from Fort Worth. I have great memories of Texas, principally centered in T-bone steaks and Lone Star beer. By the way, do they still have Lone Star beer?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You bet.
Well,
Nothing changes in Texas. It's solid.
You'll have to have one for me today.
No problem. I'd love to. Just not more than 3. That gets me in trouble.
No, not more. Not two's enough. Two's enough. We leave it there.
That's what my wife tells me. She monitors me. I've never been good about moderation in my life.
Well, there you are. Good man. Well, look, that brings us into your story, Tim. So, look, why don't you tell us your story?
You bet. I'd love to. So I grew up in a real small town. I mean, of course, in the United States, it's a town in the state of Ohio. It's a small country town, if you can get the picture. Probably about 5,000 people. Everybody knew everybody. Mom and Dad were, just great childhood. I'm one of 6. There's 5 boys and a girl, and we beat each other up all the time. Sports is what we kind of live for, very competitive family. My dad grew up on a farm. I did not grow up on a farm, but I grew up in a small town, and everything was real structured. There was one Catholic church in our town called Sacred Heart, and I went there because I had to, which I could not stand because I wanted to have fun. I just wanted to have fun, and I was forced to be an altar server, that kind of thing. That's how I looked at it. And, did normal stuff. I got a lot of fights growing up, sports and all that stuff. But, we didn't, I don't think there was too much trauma or anything that I can look back to my childhood for reasons for me going nuts. But what happened, David, is when I was about 15, maybe 14, who knows, I think 15, one of my brothers, Paul, told me if I drank some of this alcohol that it'd make me feel funny. And I just didn't believe it. I said, I don't see why me drinking something is going to make me feel different. I just don't believe it. And I'll believe it when I see it kind of guy. So I remember I was behind a bowling alley, and he gave me a 40-ounce. I remember it was really cold, and I remember I downed the whole thing. And I said, I don't feel nothing. And next thing I know, I'm running through, he's having to pull me out of some bushes, and I wake up and I'm soaked and I've been puking everywhere and, that kind of thing. And that's my first recollection of, really getting drunk, right? And, Dave, how it was for me is my parents, great people, but it was kind of like, out of sight, out of mind. We didn't have these discussions. Dad was just old school. Do what you're supposed to do. You make your bed, you lay in it. We didn't have all these kind of conversations, and nobody had ever even talked to me about drugs, hardcore drugs. But I was a workout guy, a sports guy. We used to like to get in a lot of fights, and so, I really wasn't around hard drug use. But what happened is, over the course of time, and ever since I was 15, I got invited up to a big university, huge university. In fact, they won in America here. They had the college football playoffs this year, and they won the entire playoffs. It was Ohio State University. It's a huge university.
Very famous, the football
team
there, yeah.
Yeah, that's where I went to school. And but I started going up there when I was young because my brother went there, and he gave me in order to get into the bars, you had to be like, at one time it was 19, and then they shifted to 21. But he gave me his ID, and so I used his ID, and you had to memorize here, at least in America. I don't know how it works there. You have to have a Social Security number, and that's what they would ask you. They would say, if they questioned your ID. So he gave me his military ID, and I memorized it. And I tell him today, David, I said, I still remember your Social Security number, because I had it ingrained in me. So bottom line is, I started going to that bar, and oh man, this bar was famous. I mean, to tell you, here in America, if you went to university and you came to Ohio State, in fact, they sold more beer per square foot than any bar in the United States in the 1980s. That's what they were known for. And the reason is because they sold buckets of beer, and it was cheap for us broke college kids. So I remember going up there when I was like 15. Now, I'm hanging out with 19-year-olds and 21-year-olds, and man, I loved it because I always like to talk to people and meet women and stuff like that. So as soon as I got in that crazy environment, buckets of beer, drinking, getting in fist fights. I mean, there'd be 3 or 4 fights every single night at that bar. And it's as crazy as that sounds, that was fun to me, just to get real drunk, go to a football game, and get in a fist fight and see how many girls you can flirt with, And because I was younger, I thought that was the coolest thing in the world, that I was getting to talk to all these what I considered older women. I mean, they were 19 or 20 or that kind of thing, but I was only like 15, right? So I knew for sure one thing, that's where I was going to go to school. Now, it wasn't because I needed to get an education. I just wanted to have fun. That's how I looked at it. So I got to come here. So it wasn't too long. A few years later, I went there. But before that happened, and I want to kind of pull out for you kind of my journey, if you will, step by step here.
Yes.
So what happened in the United States, there's this thing, they call it spring break. I know they don't have it there, but it's called spring break, and people, if you look it up on the internet, spring break at Daytona Beach in Florida, you'll find all kinds of videos and pictures.
It's also Cancun, because when we lived in Cancun, they were notorious. Spring breakers were notorious, and they actually broke. I suppose they were obviously all a mix, but certainly the notorious ones were notorious, because I remember a case, for instance, in a hotel I knew. Some fellow dropped a television set from a 4th floor down into the lobby. Crazy things like that, but that was innocent compared to the stuff that happened in the nightclubs.
Oh, you bet. Yeah, and I didn't know about Cancun. That was too fancy for me. I found out about that much later in life. I've since been to Cancun a few times, and I thought, boy, if I came here in college, I'd be dead,
Yeah, you
because
would.
The elaborate resorts and
tequila competitions, yeah.
Oh, and remind me if I don't, because I'll forget things. Remind me to come back to outside of Cancun, somewhere. I'm trying to remember where it is, but down in the city. Just remind me to come back to that later in life, okay? So,
yeah.
But let's go back here. So I remember my brother, who was at Ohio State. I'm like a sophomore in high school. I'm who knows, 15, whatever. And they were all going to this big party. Now, I never wanted to miss a party, right? Never. I wanted to be around everything crazy. That's just how I always was. So they went to spring break, and I had a friend of mine. His parents were going to Florida. Now, David, they were not going to the crazy part. They were going to the family part, if you will.
Yeah.
Right? But I was happy to go. They invited me. I remember my dad said, "Why would you want to go to Florida?" And I'm thinking, "Oh, I don't know, half-naked women." And yeah, I didn't tell him that, but I'm like, drink all day. That sounds good to me. So anyways, I went with this family. And I remember clearly this man taking me and my friend over to the crazy part. Like, we were 3-4 hours away. We were on the Gulf side there in Florida, and they were on the Atlantic side over in Daytona.
Yeah.
And I remember going over there, and it reminds me of what you just described, David. People were literally, you can look this up on the internet, Daytona Beach in the 1980s, okay? Literally, the people were falling off the balconies because everybody was so drunk, right? And eventually they closed the balconies off where you couldn't go on the balconies in Daytona because people were dying.
Yeah.
But I remember it's 12 noon. It's packed. Crazy packed. And somehow somebody I knew we ran into, and they brought me to my brother's room, and which is, there's thousands and thousands of, probably millions of people there. And they brought me to my brother's. It's around 12 noon during the day, and there's my brother sitting out on the balcony without his shirt on. He can't even talk. His voice is practically gone, with a half bottle of Jack Daniels or Jim Beam.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, what is going on? This is the wildest things. And right before everything was going to get crazy at the nighttime, I had to get back in the car with my friends, and the parent that brought us, and drive back to the family side of the Florida. And I remember thinking, I will be back. I will be back because I don't want to miss a party. So you fast forward, I get to college, and first year, my brother's last year, and there we are, and we go off to this crazy, crazy, crazy environment. And I did that multiple times throughout the year. Now, here's college, okay, for me. College was, I worked at a bar, the most famous bar called Papa Joe's, where they sold buckets of beer. And that's, I made some part-time income. Now, I went to the Air Force to part-time, it's called the Air Guard, they call it, like the reserves, to pay for my college. So once a month I'd go there. So that'd give me a little money. Didn't have a lot of money, but the whole college experience was about working out. We loved to work out. I hung out with a lot of guys that were power lifters, and we would work out. I actually lived above the gym, this famous gym there, and we would party literally Wednesday through Saturday, and even Sunday, actually. There was a night for everything. And I wasn't doing any drugs at the time, but we would just drink, get in fights, get with women, just whatever. Just barely getting by college, okay? I got by, and I got my degree eventually, but I'm just completely irresponsible. It was always about fun. Now, I want to say something. My mom is like a Mother Teresa. My dad can be seen every night on his knees. He just died this year on All Saints Day, but even when I'd go back and see him, every night, every morning he's up praying the rosary, and every night he'd be on his knees. And if I opened his bedroom door, there he was praying the prayers.
Oh,
so they were just real prayerful Catholic people. But I never went to church when I went off to college. I went once a month when I came home, because I had to go to what they call the Air National Guard. It's like the Air Force Reserves, and once a month you go do your duty. And I had to do that, and I'd have to go to church with Mom and Dad, right? That's the only time I went to church. And my mom would ask me, did you go to Mass? And I'd say, sure I did, because I didn't want to mess with all the fighting about it. And so a couple things, and obviously stop me and interject anytime, David, okay?
Sure.
So something, just a couple bullet points. One, and I wrote this book just recently. It's called From the Crack House to God's House, The Power of a Mother's Prayer. And in there I have my mom, because my mom died in 2004. But in there I have my mom's prayer journals and letters to me throughout all of this experience. And I just wanted to just show you the power of my mom's prayers, and I'll continue with the story and talk about what I really got into. But it's 1992. I'm in Daytona Beach. And this was my last spring break at Daytona Beach. And this nearly cost me my life. My friend, Rob, found me in a hot tub, and I had drinking a half a bottle of Jim Beam whiskey.
Good God.
And I passed out. So, number one, it's a miracle I didn't drown because I'm passed out in a hot tub having drank a lot of whiskey. They rushed me to the hospital in an ambulance. And when I get there, my blood alcohol level is 40%, which, that's enough to kill you as well. And, so I didn't drown. I didn't die of alcohol poisoning. And years later, and I mean years later, my mom died in 2004, I got her diary, and I still have it. And it's throughout my book. And by the way, if you have any listeners out there that are real prayerful moms, dads, or grandpas and grandmas, and they're praying for their kids or grandkids, they're going to love this. Book's going to give them a lot of hope, okay? And if you're one of those wild guys like me that's out there addicted to meth, cocaine, crack, which we'll get into, man, I understand you well, okay? Fighting and partying, and that was the crew I hung out with. But just to give you an idea, so in my mom's diary, remember, I just got woken up in a hot tub, 40% blood alcohol, and didn't die. And at that exact same time period, 1992, I find this in like 2004. I found my mom's prayer journal. Here's what she said. She said, I have started to fast on Wednesdays and Friday. Now listen what she says, David. Wednesdays are for our children and their special needs at a time unknown to me, but not to you.
Wow.
And then she says this specifically about me. She said, she's got 6 kids, and if you know my mom, she prayed for everybody she ever met in her life. And she says, I am fearful for Tim. Talking about me. She said, I know you love him, but I have to keep reminding myself that you have control of these situations. I need to be sharing more with my children about you. So there she is praying for me and saying, I'm going to go ahead and fast on Wednesdays for my children, especially Tim. I don't know exactly at what time, God, but you do. Isn't that amazing? And, I'm just like, I look back, I go, my goodness, if you ever talk about the power of a mother's prayer.
The power of a mother's prayer and the power of her, just what an amazing mother fasting for her children.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%, right? 100%. So all right. So look here. I remember that. This is looking back. So then, what happened toward the end of my college years? What happened is I was working at this bar, and the owner brought me back down into the basement. He said, "Yeah, Francis, come on downstairs. That's my last name, but that's what he called. You always call each other by your last name. Hey, Francis, come downstairs." And I didn't know what was going on. I'd never been around hard drugs, to be honest with you. And so when I went down there, he was buying cocaine. And the other bouncer said, "Hey, Francis, you want some?" And I think the first time I might have said, "No, I'm good." I didn't even know what it was. And the second time he said, you want some? I said, "What do you do with it?" He said, "Well, you put it up your nose, you sniff it." And you got to understand, I'd never been around this, man. So I sure. No one warned me about the addiction, all that kind of stuff. I may not have listened anyways, David, so I did it. What I can tell you is that sent me on a tailspin. I stayed up all night. Anybody who has ever done that kind of drug, I thought it was the greatest feeling in the whole world.
Wow.
And so what happened, and that was right at the end of my college years, man, and I never would have graduated had it been during my college years. And from that time on, every time I had too much to drink, I would want that cocaine. I mean, like a dog chasing a bone. I would want that cocaine, right?
Wow.
And then something really significant happened. A friend of mine one day said, "Hey, Tim," because he liked to party with it as well. And he said, "Tim, I've got something better. I've got a better way to do it to get the high, right?"
Yeah.
And he said, "See this right here? If you take that cocaine and if you put some baking soda with it and you put it in the in the cup, and you put it into the microwave, it turns hard, and they call it crack. Now, remember, I don't know, have never even heard of this. I mean, I hadn't even seen a movie on this stuff yet, So I remember there was a movie called New Jack City, I think it was called, with Chris Rock. And I remember that was years after I'd done this, and I remember thinking, that's exactly how it is. But the bottom line is, he turned me on to crack cocaine. And oh, my goodness. Looking back, how that just about destroyed my life. My buddy lost his marriage, a friend of mine, and I moved into his houses after college, and he introduced me to going down to what we call the hood, which was, hardcore, the projects, and I got introduced to this underworld of people who are dealing, smoking, just as deep and dark. Everybody's wearing gold chains, carrying 9mm, and so I look back and I go, it's this one step after the next step. People say, how could somebody raised with a good family end up being addicted to crack cocaine? Well, it doesn't happen necessarily overnight. It's one decision, right, that leads to another decision. And if I can, and I'll come back, I'll finish the story, but I'm reminded there's an exorcist that's a friend of mine, Father Vincent Lampert. And if any of your listeners are on the internet and they want to look him up, it's well worth it. Father Vincent Lampert. He's a very well-known exorcist, in fact. And so I've done some talks, and we'll get into that. I've traveled for 15 years now to share some of the things I'm going to talk about today. And he talks about the way the enemy works. And he says, the evil spirits, because there's good and evil. Now, whether your listeners are religious or not religious, you have to know there's good and evil. Anybody who's lived long enough knows there's good and evil, right? So he says evil spirits thrive on destroying people's lives, and they do it in always 4 ways. I call them the 4 Ds, Ds as in dog, right? And he says the first one is deception. Now think about it, listeners. Anybody in your life, any relationship you have, if there's deception, that always causes division, and that's the second D. And that's what evil wants. It wants to divide relationships. I mean, think about our world. Think about your country. There's so much division that goes on in families. And so deception leads to division, and division leads to diversion. What is it diverting people off of? It's diverting people away from the path of goodness, always, right? And then the diversion then leads people to discouragement. Now, David, I don't know about in Ireland, but in the United States, suicide amongst young people is an epidemic.
Unfortunately, that has become the case here too.
Yes. And now, when I grew up, not that there wasn't people who committed suicide, but it was rare. But now it's everywhere. Well, and as the Exorcist says, the evil is not more powerful today than it was 100 years ago or 50 years ago. It's just people have invited evil in at a much quicker pace. Now, so I go back to my story, how this happens, right? Well, it's really like this. I had this carpe diem, seize the day. This is all you have. Live for the moment. And I remember talking to the exorcist, Father Vincent, and he said that evil has 3 guiding principles, and they are this, and then I'll continue my story. He says, 1, you may do as you wish. Now, everybody knows, and here at least, but people used to respect authority a lot more back in my dad's day, right?
Yes.
So the 1 is you may do as you wish. 2 is no one has the right to command you. And 3 is you are a god of yourself. And so that's kind of the mentality, I talk to parents all the time that they're worried about their kids that have gone astray. Maybe they're addicted to drugs, or maybe they're just addicted to wealth and materialism, or whatever the case is, right? Fame, power.
And all this, all this New Age stuff, Tim, all the New Age stuff is all about me. Everything, happiness is in me. It's self-fulfillment, self-this, self-that, self-realization. That is very interesting that you just said that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I remember that big thing going around called The Secret. And it was like, you manifest what you think about, and whatever you bring about, you cause. So if you have bad, it's because you're thinking bad. And I thought, you know what? That is so blatantly takes out the world of spirits, because the reality of it is that evil is always lurking around the corner. And you invite that evil in, not necessarily just thinking about bad things. You invite evil in by sin, right? By perversion.
Well, that's all we have time for today. But next week, I look forward to continuing my chat with Tim. But meanwhile, you can listen back to this program and previous programs on my podcast, Finding Happiness. You'll find it on YouTube and Spotify. For now, good night and God bless.